Good morning. I'm Al Carroll, University Activation Senior Manager at TechPoint, and I want to welcome everyone to the third and final event in our three-part series on the path to equity in Indiana Tech. We are thrilled that over 200 people have registered for today's session, going beyond metrics, following a great session last week on intersectionality. If you were unable to attend the last session, you can watch the recording. We'll drop that link in the chat. I personally walked away with some great takeaways, including learning about the table of diversity. You can learn more about my favorite part of the last session at tableofdiversity.com. I'm looking forward to continuing the learning today as we focus on the impact that can come from truly committing to this journey. This series is possible thanks to a few organizations who stepped up to support as sponsors. So thank you to Round Tower, an elite systems integrator known for providing innovative business solutions backed by timely and personable support, for being an underwriting sponsor of this session. Thank you also to Faegre Drinker, a go-to law firm for our tech community, and Comcast Business, a partner in internet, phone, and cable for organizations large and small, for stepping up to be presenting sponsors for this series. It is my pleasure to introduce Pamela Dover, Senior Director of PA and Business Development from Comcast Business. Welcome, Pamela.
Thank you very much. Good morning to all. At Comcast, we believe that a diverse, equitable, and inclusive company is a more innovative and successful company. That philosophy starts with our chairman and CEO, Brian Roberts, who earlier this year announced the company's multi-year $100 million commitment to sustained action centered on social justice, education, digital equity, and small business opportunity. This announcement is the latest in our longstanding commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Just last month here in Indy, we awarded the Indiana Black Chamber of Commerce a grant. They were able to provide relief funds to Black-owned businesses that were hit hard by COVID-19. Our Comcast Rise initiative provides small businesses that are greatly impacted by the pandemic with free marketing insights and opportunities to apply for media, technology upgrades, and grants up to $10,000. Early next year, we will announce Lift Zones in partnership with local nonprofits to provide safe spaces for low-income students to connect to the internet. Lift Zones complements our Internet Essentials program, which since 2011 has helped connect more than 8 million low-income people to the internet at home. These are just a few examples of our diversity, equity, and inclusion community initiatives. We also have a robust DEI program for our employees, including diversity training and speaker series. Yesterday, we had General Colin Powell share career insights and personal reflections on leadership, service, and bridging cultural divides. We are a proud sponsor of TechPoint's Path to Equity series. The sessions have been impactful with amazing speakers and thought-provoking breakout sessions. I know today's session, which is the final, is going to take us even higher. Comcast Business look forward to continuing the conversations and helping businesses to succeed. Thank you.
We can't hear you, Al.
Yeah, Al, you're not on mute, but we cannot hear you. That's a first.
Yeah, Al, we still can't hear you. So I guess I will step in and keep the ball moving here. So thank you so much, Pamela, for your comments and for sponsoring this series. We really do appreciate your support. So my name is Demetria Miles McDonald. I'm the founder and CEO of Decide Diversity, and I have been with you for the past 2 sessions. Today's the 3rd, and I'm really excited to continue in this learning journey with you all and to be with you here today. I'm even more excited about today's session. Today, we have a powerhouse speaker. He's very motivating and very inspiring, and will help hopefully shed some light on ways for you to think about your own DEI journey. Today, we are going to hear from James LaDuca. James is the Senior Director of Global Inclusion and Diversity at Twitter. Since James is on the West Coast and has two little ones at home that he is pandemic parenting, as he calls it, this early morning time really didn't work out for him. But we knew that he would bring a lot of value to the discussions that we've been having. So we wanted to speak with him a few days earlier, and we did. We recorded that conversation, and we're going to play it for you here today. We're going to play it through Zoom, so you don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to do anything. We're going to play it right here for you on the screen. But if you are having any issues with video quality, we're going to put the YouTube link in the chat section. So if you want to pull it up in another window and watch alongside with us, you can. Do this. Make sure that you have a pencil and pad, paper. Take notes, because there's going to be a lot of nuggets that James is going to drop today during this conversation, and you don't want to miss any of it. So Anna, take it away. James, we are really excited to speak with you today and learn more about you, your role within Twitter, and some things that you're leading within the organization to move the needle on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Before we get started, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and some of the things that you've done over your career?
I'm happy to, but first I have to put you on the spot. Introduce us to this lovely little one who's joined us for the conversation.
Yeah, so this is my little guy. His name is Doran, and he is 3.5 months old. Yeah, so James, he may have some input. He may have some questions about things that you're talking about. So if you hear him in the background, that's what's going on.
Doran, I want you to hold our feet to the fire. Ask those hard-hitting questions. I believe in you, buddy. And in fact, Dimitri, you'll appreciate this. You find me pandemic parenting from my garage in San Francisco, where me and my husband have two little ones. I would be surprised if during the course of this recording, our older one, who's 3, didn't make a cameo. So Doran's going to be in really good company. Don't you worry.
Yeah, I love that. I actually wrote down pandemic parenting because I think that describes a lot of our experiences over the past, 8 months or so. So I love that, pandemic parenting. I'm going to remember that. But tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to take a moment to say thank you for considering me, and the entire TechPoint community here in Indiana, and all of you who are watching. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. As Dimitri said, I'm James. I use he, him pronouns, and I have the privilege of looking after global inclusion and diversity at Twitter. I also chair the San Francisco Human Rights Commission and sit on the LGBTQ Advisory Committee for US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Now, that may be my CV, but that is by far the least interesting part about me. I grew up on the knee of my abuela in the Central Valley of California. And if you know California and the Central Valley, what you know is that's farm country and it's immigrant country. And, when I grew up, my dad was farming and in the fields. And my mom had this radical idea that she would go to college and have a career, which for a Mexican woman in the 60s was completely unheard of. And so I grew up at a very early age, sort of struggling with my Latinx identity, because it was a very unpopular period in the United States to be Latinx. So I learned to hide myself at a very early age. And, for better or for worse, that would come in really handy as I would get into high school, because I would come to terms with my sexuality, and it was the height of the AIDS crisis. And the only thing I knew about gay people was that they were monsters. And I definitely didn't want to be that. So I hid into myself a little bit more. And, it wasn't until I got to the Berkeley campus, go Bears, that I, for the very first time in my life, saw an example of a person bringing their full authentic self to a situation. And that did two things for me. It gave me permission, and it gave me power to do the same. And I share that story with you because I make a habit of sharing my personal journey and inviting other people to share theirs, to give everyone power and permission to bring their full authentic selves to the world and to their work. You know, at Twitter, on day one in flight school is what we call our new orientation program because it's Twitter and there's lots of bird analogies. So at flight school, we remind people that they weren't hired to fit in. We hired you to stand out. Your differences are your superpowers. And we want you to bring those differences to Twitter and make us better.
I absolutely love that. And it fits in really well with some of the things that we've been talking about over the past 2 weeks, like, cultural fit and whether or not that's something that we really need to look for. Do we want people to fit in, or do we want them to, complement the culture that we have and really stand out, as you said? I wrote down permission and power. I love that. Giving people permission to show up as their true authentic selves and giving them the power. That to me, if I have those two things within your organization or even just around you, I feel like I'm going to show up and be ready to contribute and be ready to give you my all. So I'm going to make sure that we include that in our follow-up and our resources for everyone listening, because I think that needs to be top of the agenda. How do we grant permission and how do we give people the power to show up? Thank you for sharing your story. What 2020 has been just a really interesting year, right? It's not been something that any of us have planned for. I would have loved to have this discussion with you in person with a room full of people, but of course that couldn't happen. How has the events of 2020 affected how you lead diversity, equity, and inclusion, and really just your journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's face it, just when you thought 2020 had done the most, it goes and does more. And there is not a person that the events of this year has left untouched in some capacity. And quite frankly, if you work in DEI, and if you know anyone who works in DEI who says that this has not been the most challenging year of their entire career, it's one of two things. They're either not doing it right or they're lying. And, while there are many parts of our companies when all of this is in the rear view mirror, and this year is a distant memory, there are many parts of our company that may contract to some semblance of normal. Of course, things will never truly go back to more normal, but there are parts of business that will contract. That is not true if you work in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Our portfolios and the scope of our work have been forever expanded, and there's simply no going back. But, this year isn't a moment, it's part of a movement that started long ago. And if there's a silver lining to 2020, it's that it helped welcome millions of more allies to this movement. And so what does that work look like in terms of DEI? Well, at Twitter, it's meant adapting our workplace to enable anyone, anywhere to be able to work for Twitter. It means providing parents and caretakers additional support to help offset challenges of pandemic parenting. It means supporting Black employees with mental health resources and equipping the rest of our employees with allyship resources and meeting our tweets where they are, recognizing that this year, emotions are incredibly high for everyone. It also means acknowledging that increased xenophobia towards our Asian community or Muslim community, that COVID is decimating the Black and Latinx community in the US. To summarize, it means that during a year when we faced unprecedented global pandemics, our most marginalized communities are hurting 2 or 3 times over more. And as employers, it's our job to acknowledge and support those employees, especially those from underrepresented communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I feel like you went through that list of things, of benefits that you're offering various employees. You went through that really fast. I couldn't write all those down. So tell me once more, what are some of those things that Twitter is doing to really be supportive of your employees during this time? And go a little bit slower. Let me write it down. Make sure I got it in my notes.
Sure. I think the reason why we were able to continually meet the needs of our employees, who we call tweeps, so to meet the needs of our tweeps at every moment throughout the year when the urgent issue of the moment had shifted dramatically beyond what anyone could forecast, is because we go into all situations, especially our DEI work, with humility and a beginner's mind, and we start with deep listening. And so what deep listening for us unlocked was really understanding what the pain points were for our tweeps, not just for underrepresented tweeps, but for all of our tweeps. And then how could we design solutions for them to meet their needs? Because it is our responsibility. Companies no longer have the privilege of sitting on the sidelines. There are no sidelines. Post 2020, buy sidelines, because sitting something out is now a powerful statement. And so we recognize the responsibility that we have as Twitter to understand the pain that our employees are experiencing and design solutions to help alleviate that pain. So we first adapted our workplace to enable anyone, anywhere, to be able to work at Twitter. This is work that actually started several years ago when our CEO, Jack, challenged us to lean into decentralized distributed work. So fortunately, we had done a lot of the early research and studying to understand what a pivot to a fully distributed workforce could look like. It meant once we realized that we had integrated work life and home life, some of the people having the most acute pain points were parents and caretakers. So understanding what their needs at the moment was, and then how do we offset the challenges that those parents are facing by increasing benefits for them, but also by empowering their managers to lean into flexible work hours, understanding that every single parent is going to be caretaking in a different way and require different schedules, different timelines, and a different way of working. During the summer of racial reckoning, it was understanding that while we were all experiencing the trauma of world events, our Black employees were experiencing it orders of magnitude greater levels. So how could we identify mental health resources and specifically identify therapists who specialize in racism-related trauma to make those resources available to our Black tweeps? Now, everyone else doesn't get to sit that out. We leaned into allyship principles for everyone who were also experiencing world events and wanted to understand how they could act in that moment to support a broader movement. You could even Google it. Google Twitter allyship principles. Fun fact, because it's 2020, you'll find two, because we did how to practice allyship now in Q1 in the context of COVID. And it was co-authored by the leader of our BRG, of our Asian BRG, because what we heard was our Asian employees around the world were experiencing acute rise in xenophobic attacks, and everyone cared about that. And so we wrote a how to practice allyship right now during a time of COVID blog, and it's centered around our allyship principles that we have trainings on all around Twitter. And then lo and behold, we had to write it again, how to practice allyship right now in the summer of racial reckoning in the context of the Black Lives Matter movement. So, and none of this work would have been possible had we not started every new encounter, every new breaking news headline with an opportunity to deeply listen to our tweets.
I love how all of this started with just asking, questions and then sitting back and listening and like you said, deep listening to hear the responses, to hear how people are feeling in this moment and what they need. And I each one of these, it reminds me of the presentation we had last week on intersectionality. You're starting with those who are disproportionately affected by what's going on, providing them with what they need. And I'm sure those benefits helped everyone within the organization, even if they weren't a member of that particular demographic. So I love what you mentioned and all the resources and assistance that you were providing to all of the tweepers.
Tweeps.
Tweeps. Okay, I'm gonna get that right because I love it.
You
Tweeps.
get used to it after a while. It's a little corny, but you get used to it and you learn to love it.
No, I think that's part of the culture. I think that's amazing. So I love that. I love flight school. So keep giving us those, Twitter-esque phrases and words that you all use to let people know that, they're part of the culture. So it's great to hear about all of these wonderful things that you're doing, and it sounds like you're having great success with it. What are some things that you all have struggled with in the past, and what have you done to close the gap in those areas?
Sure. I mean, that's a fantastic question. In terms of, what makes a difference the most, it's leaders who are fully committed to this work, who are willing to acknowledge and confront their own biases and acknowledge the gaps that may exist, and then dig deep into this work with humility and authenticity. Full stop. Like, that's what makes the most difference. Now, there's a temptation when we say leaders who do this to think, oh, it's the executive, it's the VP, it's the senior most person in a company. I fundamentally believe every single one of us is a leader at our company. And if you don't think so, it's just because you haven't unlocked your potential yet. I like to remind people that, well, you need to revisit this in the context of 2020. 80% of meeting culture, perhaps more now, happens in meetings. And so, have you ever called a meeting in your life? Chances are you have. And that means that you are a leader responsible for the rules of the road as it relates to governing workplace culture. And you have a job to do in that moment to be an inclusive leader. What does that look like? Well, if you're calling a meeting, are you starting by making sure that everyone who should be part of the discussion is in that room? There can be a temptation to only include a certain core group of team because they're the most reliable go-to people, but often that can result in a meeting or a team that unintentionally excludes people. So I like to encourage people to develop a mindset of conscious inclusion. Because what we know is when you don't consciously include, you will almost inevitably unconsciously exclude. So back to calling the meeting. Have you thought about who should be in that room with intentionality? Have you scheduled it during a time that maximizes not just for employees like caregivers who might have certain drop-off or pickup responsibilities, but employees who might be in different time zones who are often the last people thought of because they're in some wacky time zone that's going to require that a group of people get up a little earlier or a little later. Also, are you, if there's a note taker, are you making sure every time you call a meeting, are you rotating who takes notes? Because what we know to be true is oftentimes the answer is no, and it is almost always the youngest woman in the room. And then finally, when your meeting is up, always leave 5 to 10 minutes at the very end and find the person who has not spoken up and saying, hey, you've been really quiet. I want to make sure that you have a chance to speak before we're done. What are your thoughts on this? Because what we know is meetings are filled with introverts, extroverts, and you want to create space as the leader in that meeting to make sure everyone has a moment to feel truly included, like they belong there and their voices are heard. And most importantly, stop the he-peat. He-peat is the term that I lovingly give to a instance where you're in a meeting and someone in the meeting says something, and let's be clear, it's normally a woman, goes largely disregarded, only to have the exact same thought brought up a little later in the meeting, let's be clear, usually by a man, and have everyone acknowledge what that man said. And when you see that happen, what I love to do is just gently redirect and send a very clear message to everyone in the room, which is turn to the men who just performed a he-peat and say, I am so glad you emphasized the point that she made earlier. And then point to the woman and say, did you want to build on that at all? I'll tell you one thing, it sends a very powerful message. And I guarantee you, it only takes 1 or 2 moments like that for the he-peater not to do it anymore.
I love that. And, you know, it reminds me of something that happened during the Obama administration, where the women and their allies in a meeting would amplify their voices. And so it's very much like you said, if a woman came in and had an idea, but no one really acknowledged it, and then a man came in and said the exact same thing, the women and the allies in the room would amplify the woman's voice and as you said, redirect it back to her so that everyone could know that, hold on, wait a minute, you know, she's the one who originally said this. Let's make sure that we're giving her credit and acknowledging the amazing ideas that she's bringing to the table and allowing her to really show up and be herself here in this forum. So many great tips. I mean, I'm going to walk away having to get a new notebook because I have so many notes. So thank you for that. This is really good. You know, what does it look like to truly commit to change for you and for the leaders within Twitter?
If I had one piece of advice to everyone listening, it's that you need to lean into the discomfort. Look, I am a queer Latinx kid from the Central Valley of California. I have been having uncomfortable conversations my entire life. And for so many of us, not having uncomfortable conversations isn't an option. In order to be heard, we need to lean into that discomfort. And so the other thing, because I've been having these conversations my entire life, I can tell you about them, is that uncomfortable conversations are extraordinary growth opportunities. And so personally, I think the very last thing we should be doing in this moment is depriving anyone of the kind of growth opportunity that an uncomfortable conversation can bring. And look, companies have a role to play in these uncomfortable conversations too, including systemic racism and biases. What 2020 has shown us is that acknowledging systemic racism is now the bare minimum you can do. And so at Twitter, we like to focus on ensuring that these conversations, while uncomfortable, are rooted in mutual respect and that they're healthy and they're productive. You know, because if you can't set those parameters and lean into the discomfort, then how will we ever work to truly unpack and understand the role of 400 years of systemic racism that has preferentially advantaged one race at the expense of all other races? So this is our opportunity. And then I think the thing that I'll close with on this point is that when we confront it, it cannot be performed. It must be authentic, because if it's not, people will notice and they will call you out. And one of the things I love about this year, there aren't many, although we did have a baby, is that there are plenty of examples of this, right? So let's talk about authenticity. In order to be authentic, there has to be context. It has to be contextualized. And let me give you an example from Twitter. At Twitter, we've been at this a while. And while we may not always get it right, there's a track record and a history that demonstrates that the commitment is there. So when we say Black Lives Matter, or we call for criminal justice reform, or we call for justice for Breonna Taylor, there's a history and there's a context. And then we work to make sure that those words are backed up by the actions we take. Internally, we revisited all of our existing training, and we updated unconscious bias, and we included the allyship programs that I mentioned earlier. But we also created brand new programs. We hosted company all hands that were exclusively intended to normalize discussions about racial equity, anti-racism, and social justice. And we invite all of our employees, all of our tweeps into these conversations. We've hosted folks like Dr. Ibram Kendi, Janet Mock, and Jack even moderated one with the Equal Justice Initiative. And then externally, we work to make big financial commitments to civil rights organizations. We made Juneteenth a company holiday. If you don't know what Juneteenth is, look it up because you're missing out. And we elevated the voices of Black creators, artists, activists, and other people who use the service on billboards and in ads and in places where protests are happening. I'm telling you, Demetria, lots of work has happened and continues to happen. Sorry, one last point, which I keep saying, right? You might be thinking, okay, great, like we're not Twitter, we're a teeny tiny company, and we don't have this history or context to fall back on to contextualize. That's fine. If you are new to this movement, first of all, welcome. Second of all, you can do the exact same thing. Provide context. Start with humility. Let whoever is listening, your employees, your customers, your communities, understand what led you to the awakening in this moment, what you are prepared to do next, and then just dig in and do the work authentically. There's never been a better time to start this work.
I love that. You hit on so many great points, but I love that you are welcoming everyone to this work, because it really is going to take all of us to move the needle and to advance where we are as a country. But also to do this authentically, because as you said, we know when someone is not doing this authentically, when it's just performative. We know when someone is just telling us what we want to hear, but not actually doing the work. And we're starting to utilize different resources and like Twitter to figure these things out, because we need to know before we start working at these organizations that not only are they going to hire us, but they're going to allow us to show up as our full selves. So thank you for sharing that.
Demetria, I feel like you set me up for a completely shameless plug right now.
Yeah, go ahead.
Which is, we're hiring. We, at the beginning of this year, if you can think far back to January, we actually unveiled a bold new vision for our workforce for 2025, which is by 2025, we want 50% of our global workforce to be women. Why? Well, it's really simple. First of all, half of the world's population is female, but what we all know to be true is that in far too many decisions of major consequence in this world, a woman's needs, voices, emotions, and contributions are far too often an afterthought. And we imagine the consequences if that were true at a company like Twitter. That can never be true at Twitter. And then in the United States, we want 25% of our US workforce to be underrepresented minorities, specifically Black, Latinx, multiracial, Indigenous. And it's because we believe that we have a responsibility for our company to reflect the diverse communities that we serve. So my plea to you is, if you like what you've heard, go to our career site and look and see if there's a job that you think you'd be a great fit for. And then, slide into my DMs. I'm like, that's at James LaDuca. Slide into my DMs and, include a link to the role and why you think you're perfect for it. And you have my commitment. I will get that to a recruiter to make sure someone takes a look at it, because we can only do this work if folks like you who are listening to this, who are fired up and thinking, yes, I want to be part of this, join our movement.
Wow. All right, folks, you heard it here. Twitter is hiring. You can reach out directly to James, slide into his DMs, go to the Twitter career website. We'll be sure to include that in the follow-up resources, see what they have available and apply. Share this with everyone you know, whether they're looking for a job or looking for a new opportunity. You heard it here, Twitter is hiring. You know, James, I just want to end on one thing, and that's really what you would recommend that the people who are listening do. What's one thing that people who are tuning into this can walk away with and do to move the needle within their own organizations?
Whew. How much time you got?
About 60 seconds.
What's the one thing that you can do? Reflect on your personal journey and what has got you to that moment. You are much stronger and more powerful than you could possibly imagine. And I want to encourage you to use that power and that privilege in this moment where so many people are struggling to take us forward. You know, like everyone, I've got good days and I've got hard days. But there is something that my good days always have in common. And that is, if I can be intentional about where I focus my energy, if I can be intentional about where I focus my gaze, I can be reminded of my many blessings, my many, and they are everywhere. And it's hard to think about that in a year like this, but we are all so blessed and we are all so powerful. You know, this is going to be a distant memory, and we will come out stronger. And I want to encourage everyone to reflect, how can I use my blessings? How can I use my power to get us to the other side of this dumpster fire of a year sooner?
Powerful. And there you have it, folks. Now you know your marching orders. James, thank you so very much for your time, for sharing with us your insight and ways to make DEI a priority within our organizations. You know, honestly, I think that we have hit a record. I don't know about you, but this is the first time in a really long time that my little one has been asleep and during the entire meeting. So it must be your
I'm so
magical
boring.
words. No. You know, I think you were so magical that he went to sleep and he's going to wake up and be ready to tell me what you told him. So thank you so very much for joining us and letting us learn a little bit about what's happening at Twitter. We really do appreciate it.
It's been such a privilege and honor. And thank you, Demetria. Thank you, TechPoint. And congratulations, Mama. You are doing great.
Thank you so much. You are too. Here's my little guy once more. He's
my little guy. Oh. Thank you all. Thank you, TechPoint. Thank you, Demetria.
Thank you. Wow. Wasn't that amazing? I don't know about you all, but even just rewatch, I was there in the moment, but watching it this time around, I was still taking notes of things that I missed the first time. So if you need to go back and watch that again to get some nuggets, please do so, because it was, as you can see, a really great conversation. But we're not finished. Now we're going to send you into breakout rooms so that you can have some group discussions and really get down to the nitty-gritty. We want you to talk about some action steps that you can take to move yourself individually and your organization forward. So here's a couple of questions that we want you to discuss once you get to your breakout rooms. What would make the most impact for you on an individual level? So what are some things that you can do in the next 5 minutes, 5 days, 5 months, 5 years, and so on? And then repeat that on an organizational level. What are some things that you can do in the next 5 minutes, 5 days, 5 months, 5 years within your organization systemically to move the needle? We're going to have members of the TechPoint team in each room to be taking notes, and that, you know, afterwards we can share any great takeaways that we have from the event. And we're going to drop these questions into the chat section so that you can reference them once you're in the breakout rooms. We're going to bring everyone back in here in about 20 minutes so that we can hear about some really great resources that are happening and that you can utilize right here in the community. So we're going to start releasing you to the rooms now, and we'll see you soon. Great. So how did that go? I know, once again, the breakout sessions are never long enough. If you were anything like my session, people were in the middle of having a really great conversation, and then the timer started happening. So, definitely continue these conversations within your workplace and bring others along with you when you're having these conversations. I'd love to know in the chat section, what were some of the aha moments that you had either during James's talk or in your breakout session? What are things that you're going to do in the next 5 minutes, 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 months, 5 years to really move the needle within your organization? I know one of the things that we talked about in my group that I do, but I'm probably not as conscious of it as I should be. Casey talked about reading books like White Fragility. He's reading White Fragility at the moment and making sure that he continues to educate himself on intercultural competence and things of that nature. And then Brooke brought up a really great point of, when you're reading books and you're selecting documentaries and things to educate yourself, be very aware of, who's authoring these things. So who's the author of the book? Who are the characters in the books that you're reading or the movies or documentaries that you're watching? Whose perspective are you learning from? If it's a perspective that's very similar to yours, you might not have a whole lot of learning there. So make sure that you're being conscious about, who you're actually learning from, and make sure that it's someone from a different demographic or different perspective. So Jen says, move at the speed of trust and continue to have conversation in order to build perspective. Speed. Thank you, Jen. Speed. I was like, speed of trust. What is that? Is that a new term? I know we were learning all types of new terms today. I was like, speed of trust. I've never heard of that. I'm going to go with it. Melissa said that their team discussed just how you might bring a marketing expert to the conversation for a marketing meeting. Be intentional about bringing your empathetic associates into these conversations as we are having deep listening and then developing solutions to meet their needs. That's it, Melissa. I mean, honestly, if you walk away with just that today, I feel like this 3-part series has been completely worth it. So thank you all so much for engaging for the past 3 weeks. I've had a really great time with you all. I really do appreciate you welcoming me into the TechPoint community and family these past couple of weeks. And I really think that this is a really great starting point to doing the work, laying a really solid foundation and seeing some really great movement. So before I pass it back to Al, and I hope that Al, we've got your technology worked out so that we can actually hear all the wonderful things that you have to tell us. I want to share something with you all from my organization, Decide Diversity. On December 1st at 10 a.m., I am hosting a workshop. So if you want to plan your 2021 calendar for the year when it comes to events, when it comes to partnerships, programs, initiatives, all of those things, if you want to get a head start on doing that, go to www.dei2021, that's 2021.com. And you can learn more about that workshop. You can sign up. I'd love to see many of you there as you start to plan what's happening in 2021, being really intentional about that. And so DEI2021.com to learn more and to sign up. And I hope to see you all there. Again, thank you so very much for having me. I've really enjoyed the past 3 weeks and spending time with you and learning with you. And now I'm going to pass it back to Al so that Al can share some really great community resources.
Thank you so much, Demetria. We appreciate you spending your time and sharing your expertise with us over the past 3 weeks, and I look forward to the work ahead. Y'all, I hope that this series has given you a chance to reflect and gain some ideas about how to move forward in our collective journey toward being a more equitable tech community. And don't worry, the learning does not end here. Part of our larger DE&I strategy at TechPoint involves strengthening relationships with community partners who are doing good work in this space already. So we wanted to amplify some of those folks here today. So first, let's hear from Margie Worrell at United Way of Central Indiana. Margie?
Hi, Al. Thank you so much. And I wanted to say thank you to the TechPoint community for hosting this wonderful event. This has been just amazing. And I'm so grateful to have been able to be here and hear all of this wonderful, wonderful information. So I did want to share a couple of things that United Way of Central Indiana is offering. I know that one of the things that came up in our breakout session was talking about continuing to educate ourselves. So if you have that as one of your goals for the next 5 minutes, 5 days, 5 months, here are a couple opportunities. Tonight, we are actually holding our 5th in the series of 6 webinars called Understanding the Roots of Racism. And it is actually unpacking and talking about different issues and topics in our local community as they relate to racial inequities. So, and it's very focused on our local community. We have a panel of amazing thought leaders who we're bringing together to talk tonight about education in particular. It's going to be fascinating and fabulous. We've already done, in the series, we've done food, health, transportation, and housing. Tonight is education, and then December 18th, we're going to be talking about financial success. So that's a wonderful a resource for you. Another resource I'd like to bring up is the equity journey. And at United Way of Central Indiana, we are really focused on being inclusive of everyone in our community. And in light of that, we are offering an educational series. You can do it with your corporation or with a group within your corporation. It's a 5-day journey, if you will, to learn more about racial equity and educate yourself. We talk about things like white privilege, your own racial identity, racial history within our own society, microaggressions and xenophobia, as you heard in the conversation earlier. Those kinds of things are really important to educate ourselves on so that we can talk to others about it and lift it up within our own organizations. So if you're interested in hearing about those topics, I'm going to drop my email into the chat. Please reach out to me. I'm happy to talk to you about those things. And thanks for the opportunity to bring these educational components to light. Thanks, Al.
Thank you for being here, Martine. Thank you for sharing. Now let's hear from Ade Alono about the Indiana Technology and Innovation Association's Equity Agenda for 2021. Ade, what have you been working on?
Yeah, thanks, Al. Thanks for having me. So yes, I'm on the board of ITIA, the Indiana Technology and Innovation Association. For those who don't know, we're essentially an advocacy organization for the technology industry in the State House. And so we cover a lot of different areas that are of interest to the technology industry, but specifically, I'm the chair of the Equity Committee. And the position of ITIA and the reason why we formed the Equity Committee is we just think we simply can't have a thriving technology community in Indiana without diversity, inclusion, and equity. And I think most people here are well aware of the issues of the gap in tech talent representation among women and people of color. And so we're trying to address that in the State House along kind of 4 areas of policy. And so the first is quality of life in place. And so we're supporting efforts to combat bias, discrimination, and racism in Indiana, and essentially improve the quality of life and place for impacted populations so they can succeed in the workplace. And then the second area is transparency and accountability. So we're supporting efforts to drive transparency and accountability around all sorts of equity issues, and to track and identify gender and racial disparities with the goal ultimately of bridging those gaps. The third area is in resources and capital. So we're supporting policies to identify and address gaps in access to resources and capital to ensure more entrepreneurship and support of those entrepreneurs in Indiana. And then last but not least, our focus is also on education and talent. So we're supporting specific efforts to ensure access to attract girls and students of color to STEM curriculum and extracurricular programs at the K through 12 level. And so really looking forward to kind of what's going to happen in this upcoming legislative session across those areas. If you want to learn more, you can go to indianatechnology.org and learn more about ITIA. And we have a lot of information about these policy positions up there as well.
It's fantastic. Really great. Thanks today. So those are just a few resources that we have right here in our community that are working toward a more equitable future. And we all must be a part of this process. So after each one of these sessions in the series, we've sent out follow-up resources. And after today, we'll compile all of those resources and send them out to you as well. We'll also be including a survey, everybody's favorite, right? So that is your chance to give us feedback as well as to let us know how TechPoint can be most helpful to you and your organizations. It truly will be a big help. So please do help us and fill that out. This is just the beginning of the work that we have to do together. So stay tuned for more to come. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us and hope that you all have a great day. Thank you.